Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you, all of you from all around the world. Today, I was very tired as I had a very heavy training yesterday, and I thought I'm not going to be able to present the live streaming to you guys, but here we are. I'm going to address Tucker Carlson's landing in Moscow, and he interviewed, it seems today, President Putin. And because of this interview, there is a complete meltdown by the mainstream media, the legacy media, the corporate media, the mainstream journalists, what I call the prostitutes in Washington, D.C. and in European capitals as well. And there are current politicians and former politicians are calling him a traitor, and calling even to ban him from getting back to the United States. So much for democracy and so much for freedom of expression, especially at times that the Russian media is completely banned here in Europe, in the United States. So the people, the ordinary people, have to go to social media platforms to try to find what is happening in Ukraine. Otherwise, they're just going to have the perspective from the mainstream media, and that is, of course, completely biased. I'm not saying that Russia today is not biased. I'm just saying that you need to hear and listen to the both sides of the story and then make up your mind. Probably the truth is in the middle and not on this side or on that side. But when you ban and suppress the other side of the story, it gives me the impression that you're afraid for your own people to listen and hear a different perspective that can make sense to their brains and to their logic. So you're afraid to lose the narrative or the information warfare in this regards. That's why you banned all the Russian outlets. In this video, I'm going to address why this hysteria about Tucker Carlson's interview with President Putin, why Ukraine is very important for the United States and for the UK especially, and why do they hate Russia, and what are their plans in the future for Ukraine and for Russia. In this regard, guys, I have made a lecture, or I presented a lecture in Vienna, I think this was a year or year and a half ago, when the Nord Stream attacks happened, right? And I was invited to a conference in Vienna, and I presented a lecture. This was around 15 minutes lecture. I explained from the geopolitical perspective why Ukraine is very important for the United States and for Russia. And I'm going to play around 9 minutes of this lecture so that we understand why Ukraine is so important, that explains this hysteria nowadays about after Tucker Carlson's interview with President Putin, because they don't want for the Western audiences to know the other side of the story, that probably the Russian side has a point in some places or in some of the cases that they are raising in this regard. So now I'm going to play to you guys these 9 minutes of a lecture with maps and explanation why Ukraine is so important for the United States and for Russia. And accordingly, we will understand why is this hate against Russia, and why is this hysteria surrounding Tucker Carlson's interview with President Putin. Let's watch it together. If I want to summarize the struggle over Ukraine in one word, it's going to be Eurasia. The Eurasian project was first elaborated by the Brits, and the Americans adopted the ideals of the project after emerging as a superpower in the aftermath of World War II. Now, in order to establish and keep its hegemonic status over Eurasia, the priority of the United States has been, and still is, to block any sort of unity or political and economic integration of the Eurasian mainland under the leadership of one power. Hence, the American focus was on blocking the aspirations of Russia or China to become a leading power in Eurasia. However, by observing the development in the current war in Ukraine, it seems Russia and China came to the conclusion that they cannot end America's hegemony over Eurasia individually. That's why we are witnessing rapid integration of Russian and Chinese political and economic efforts, and probably military integration in the future in order to end the US's supremacy over Eurasia. Now, in the geopolitical mindset of the United States, if a unity is established in the Eurasian mainland under the leadership of Moscow or Beijing or both countries together, it will first isolate the United Kingdom and then the United States from their eastern hemisphere. The US geopolitical understanding was elaborated by the American geopolitical theorist Nicholas Stickman, whose ideas were inspired, surprisingly, by the Mongol Empire in the 13th and 14th centuries. And the Mongol Empire conquered most of the Eurasian mainland, which stretched between Far East Asia and all the way to Anatolia, and then finally to Hungary and Poland. Now, with the supremacy of the Mongolian Empire on Eurasia, Western civilization came under direct threat. And since then, Western decision makers are trying to avoid a Mongolian-style unity in the Eurasian mainland that may threaten the West in particular. And nowadays we can see these attempts of Eurasian unity outside of the US umbrella stands on three pillars. And these three pillars are Russia, China, and Iran. One of the steps toward a Eurasian unity is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which started in 1996, and it covers around 60% of the Eurasian mainland. And with Iran's full membership process, which started in 2021 under the leadership of President Raisi, to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the three pillars of Eurasia have been completed. Now, let's talk about a little bit about NATO, which was formed after World War II as a military alliance that aims at defeating the Soviet Union and forcing it to retreat from East Germany and Eastern Europe. After the collapse of the USSR, against the promise, of course, of James Baker to Gorbachev, who said that NATO will not expand 1 inch to the east of Berlin, NATO expanded eastward, especially in former Soviet countries, all the way to the borders with current-day Russia. The US isolation attempts against first the USSR, and then Russia didn't stop in Eastern Europe. Let's remember the United States supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in late 70s and early 80s against the Soviet Union. And this was the idea of Brzezinski, to drag the Soviet Union into a very costly war in Afghanistan, which eventually led to the collapse of the Soviet bloc and the Soviets retreated from Afghanistan. Now, Afghanistan geography is very important in my opinion, because it gives Washington the perfect location to project its hegemony and its power in Kazakhstan, which is one of Russia's biggest southern neighbors. And let's remember also recently the attempt for color revolution that happened again in Kazakhstan. It lies in the same context. In addition to this, I documented a lot the US support for the radical Islamists around the world, and especially in Syria, but similar attempts happened in Central Asia, in Kazakhstan, in Chechnya, in Tajikistan, and all these countries. And I also remember after the war in 1973 between Egypt, Syria against Israel, which was aimed at liberating the territories they lost in 1967 war, Anwar Sadat, back then, he chose a different path. He chose the path of diplomacy, and then Jimmy Carter jumped in and he convinced him to strike a deal with Israel. And since then, the Soviets left also Egypt, which means left the Northern Africa, and from Northern Africa, they started to project their power also on the Middle East. This package of American steps was all meant against the USSR and later Russia. Now, if you want to speak a little bit about Ukraine, which I believe is the most important geopolitical conflict in our modern times, Ukraine represents one of the 4 bridges that include France, Germany, and Poland. And this bridge gives the United States an access to the heart of the world. On the other hand, Russia without Ukraine becomes a regional power, a regional Asian power, and loses its European dimension. And this was explained again by Zelenskyy. That's why Ukraine joining the NATO, or even becoming a de facto NATO state without joining formally NATO, which has happened under Zelenskyy, unfortunately, is a red line for Russia, because Ukraine will become the starting base to project US's power into the heart of the world, which means also into Russia. Russia also believes that if Ukraine becomes NATO or client state for the United States, the latter can project its power inside Russia and trigger internal conflicts and seek the Balkanization of the Russian Federation. Based on this geopolitical context, in my understanding, that this is why the United States engineered the coup in the first place in Kiev in 2014 and supported the neo-Nazi battalions in Ukraine. And it had three main goals. One, to control Ukraine and get an access to the heart of the world. Two, to block Russia's access to the Black Sea. The Black Sea is very important for Russia. During the era of the Cold War, there was a theory of the sea power and the land power, and the Soviet Union was mostly a land power, and the American and its allies were mostly a sea power. And now the Russians believe that they need to have more access to the international waters. And for them, being blocked from the Black Sea is the same thing as being taken away from the Mediterranean. And that's why they, after the coup, the first thing the Russians did is to the referendum in Crimea, because it was very important for them to have a fleet in the Black Sea, and from the Black Sea they can also access the Mediterranean. And when the Russians came to Syria in 2015, the first thing they did is to build a fleet on the Mediterranean, because they want to have also water on the war waters. The third goal is to draw, the Americans want to draw a line in Ukraine. This is the place where they want to slice between Russia and the rest of Europe. Why? Because they want to block further economic integration of Russian and German economies, because again, in Brzezinski's thoughts, nothing threatens the American hegemony over Eurasia and eventually over the world than a Russian-German integration. So in conclusion, I believe if Russia with its energy resources and manpower come together with Germany's technology and industry, it will represent a huge challenge to the US, as the region will develop and be self-sufficient. And hence there will be no need, especially in terms of economy and security, hence there will be no need for NATO's protection of Germany. And this is something the US cannot tolerate. That's why Biden ordered, in my opinion, also the bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline. And this was also explained by the veteran investigative journalist Seymour Hersh recently. So guys, this was my lecture in Vienna. This was after the blasts of the Nord Stream pipelines, and I tried to explain from the geopolitical perspective, from what I understand, why Ukraine is very important for both the United States and for Ukraine. Because if you follow, of course, the mainstream media, they will give you the impression that in the morning Putin woke up and he decided to invade Ukraine. So I wanted to make sense out of it, right? Why he waged this offensive against Ukraine, and why is he trying to occupy nowadays the eastern parts of Ukraine and then incorporate them into the Russian Federation, why the Crimea is very important, and probably why Odessa is very important. I mean, if we don't understand these important geopolitical factors, then we will make some childish comments on X, and then we will call people traitor or not a traitor, etc., etc. One of the commentators said, please donate to UNRWA. UNRWA is the UN refugee agency, guys, for the Palestinian refugees. And as you may know, the American and the European countries have stopped funding the UNRWA because they took the accusations of Israel. Israel claims that some of the workers in UNRWA, they participated in the October 7 attack, so they stopped the funding of the complete agency. Although today, Channel 4, they have a new investigation about this allegation that debunks the Israeli allegations. But despite that, all these European and American governments stopped funding the UN agency that is the sole backer and supporter for the Palestinian refugees, and you have millions of Palestinian refugees that the funding has stopped, unfortunately. So I put the link in the description below right now. If you have the capability, I would encourage you to donate to the UNRWA. So Tucker Carlson interviewed now President Putin, and the media is going hysterical. There's a big meltdown in this regard. And one of these media outlets is, of course, the CNN. The CNN is fuming that journalist Tucker Carlson is doing journalism in Russia instead of spewing propaganda like CNN. Carlson was spotted in Russia this weekend as a speculation swirls that he interviewed Vladimir Putin. This is what the CNN has to say in this regard, guys.
A massive shakeup in Kyiv coming as Putin is trying to court the MAGA GOP in the United States. In fact, one of the leaders of the MAGA GOP is in Moscow tonight. It's the man you see here with the MAGA leader, Donald Trump, Tucker Carlson. Possibly there in Moscow to interview Putin. Definitely there as a Putin supporting celebrity. Just listen to how Russian state media is breathlessly celebrating his visit.
Independent journalist Tucker Carlson has flown to Russia from the U.S. via Turkey to Vnukovo Airport. He saw Spartacus Ballet at the Bolshoi Theater, had lunch in a nice restaurant, went for a ride around town, rode the subway.
Oh, no.
He charged his smartphone via a USB port and connected to a fast and free Wi-Fi internet.
He charged his phone, although they're knowing the details about the fact that it was during USB port may give him reason to think twice about all of this. But look at them talking about him like a celebrity. Everything he does on camera, breathlessly repeated. Now, it is unclear if an interview between Putin and Carlson will take place, but if it does, it gives Putin a chance to sit down with a big supporter.
It might be worth asking yourself, since it is getting pretty serious, what is this really about? Why do I hate Putin so much? Has Putin ever called me a racist? Has he threatened to get me fired for disagreeing with him? Does he eat dogs? These are fair questions, and the answer to all of them is no. Vladimir Putin didn't do any of that.
I'll actually always remember watching that clip. I was standing in Ukraine 48 hours before the war began there. Well, Carlson then stood by Putin consistently all the way through. And that is why he can go to Moscow now without any fear of being summarily imprisoned. He's a hero. This was Putin's mouthpiece in the United States, somebody who had turned a blind eye to the atrocities committed by Putin because they were happening far away. Once vibrant towns turned to ruins, mass graves with dozens of bodies in the Kyiv suburbs, a theater full of innocent women and children sheltering, bombed, despite the giant world children written on the roof. More than 200,000 Ukrainian soldiers killed or injured. And tonight, Putin is trying to seize on the fact that Zelenskyy's military appears to be in turmoil, capitalizing on a moment of intense American political dysfunction and intensifying.
You know, such clips makes me furious and happy at the same time. Furious because what's happening in the Gaza Strip exceeds what happened in Ukraine probably 200 times, if we count the death toll, right? Especially among the civilians. Around 30,000 civilians murdered in the Gaza Strip in 4 months, and around 20,000 or 10,000 civilians murdered in Ukraine in 2 years. So the numbers speak volume, right? And these journalists have the audacity to come and criticize Tucker Carlson, who is interviewing a president of a country that is elected, who is the head of his nation, and he represents a superpower nowadays, and he is interviewing a guy who is shaping nowadays the multipolar world. I mean, if I get the chance to interview Putin, I would interview Putin. If I get the chance to interview Biden, I would interview Biden. If I get the chance to interview the leader of North Korea, I would interview the leader of North Korea. This is my job as a journalist. But because in the United States, they preach something and they do the opposite. They preach about the freedom of press that they have in the United States, they are free and you can say whatever you want, and the journalists have the freedom to work in whatever field they want and investigate this and that and interview this person and that person. But no, not Putin. Not Putin, because we banned Russian media here for 2 years. We didn't want for our people to learn what's happening in Ukraine from the Russian perspective, because we want to propagandize our people. We don't want them to be propagandized by Russian outlets, right? So we want this to be exclusive for us. The same thing in Europe, right? The same thing in Europe. And this interview is the first interview of any American press with Putin since the NBC's interview in June 2021. And the press is hysterical, but it's not only the press. We have so many other personalities, whether they are former or current politicians, and they are spewing a lot of nonsense on social media platforms, one of which is Bill Kristol. Bill Kristol is the former chief of staff to the Vice President Dan Quayle between 89 and 93, and he was a leading advocate for the 2003 invasion of Iraq. And when Tucker Carlson was an advocate for the invasion of Iraq in 2003, Bill Kristol had no problem with him. But now when Tucker Carlson said that he made a mistake and he thinks that the invasion of Iraq was a mistake and he wouldn't support today similar invasions, now people like Bill Kristol would think that Tucker Carlson is a traitor. And he says, perhaps we need a total and complete shutdown of Tucker Carlson re-entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what is going on. He wants to ban Tucker Carlson from entering the United States for interviewing Putin. And here, Scott Ritter says, because freedom of speech is such a dangerous, un-American thing, are you afraid of what Putin may say to Tucker? Are you concerned that Tucker might platform ideas you have no counter for? Justice Louis Brandeis noted in his concurring opinion in Whitney, California in 1927 that, quote, if there be time to expose through discussion the falsehood and fallacies to avert the evil by the processes of education, the remedy to be applied is more speech, not enforced silence. So more free speech, not enforced silence. It's the American way. I totally agree with him. Dr. Simon, who is not so much into politics, he says, contrary to Joe Biden, Vladimir Putin is a president who cares about his people and is willing to get interviewed by foreign journalists. What are you afraid of? Barring a journalist from coming home is some KGB shit, Bill. Does anyone actually care about what Bill Kristol has to say about anything? And he is a US citizen, and it would be a violation if they did that. On top of that, he is a journalist. Seems like his job to interview different people. I mean, ABC reporter John Mill interviewed bin Laden after the 93 attack. Should he have been barred access back home? And then in his page, it's written like he is defending democracy, and Vivek Frey is mocking him. And it doesn't stop in the United States. You know, this type of rhetoric and statements coming also from the European Union. And this guy's name is Guy Verhofstadt. Guy Verhofstadt. He's Belgian, liberal politician. He's a member of the EU Parliament and the former Prime Minister of Belgium. And he says Tucker Carlson is surely on the path of being labeled a propagandist for the Russian regime. If he enables disinformation for Putin, the EU should explore a travel ban. Yeah, because nothing says more than democracy and freedom of press than banning someone from entering an entire continent for interviewing your opponent. And he says, why are you clowns so afraid of free speech? And it's hilarious you speak of propaganda when propaganda is all you spew. Travel banning journalists, how very semi-dictatorial of you, Guy. Luckily, there is an election coming where we can vote you out. What are you afraid of? That people might hear the truth? You really are a proper wrong gun. You, like, everybody is just, you go to the comments over and over again, and you will see all these comments of ordinary people criticizing these officials and former officials. And this is Adam Kinzinger. He's a former member of the House of Representatives and senior CNN political commentator, guys. So he's on the payroll of CNN, of course. He has something brilliant to say here. He says, he is a traitor. Tucker Carlson is a traitor, guys. And he also actually organized a poll for his Twitter fans. And he says, is Tucker Carlson on Putin's payroll? And 61.7% say yes. It's hilarious, guys. It's hilarious. One last comment is coming from a Brit, and this is coming from Marcel Gifford. He is a British volunteer in Ukraine, and he says, "Let's be clear: Tucker Carlson is a traitor to the United States." And this is the cartoon that they are posting here, Russian dressing, and they're mocking him as a Z here, like he's a Nazi, etc., etc. And here is the Minister of US Propaganda. And I also saw this tweet coming from an AI account called Terror Alarm. I think this is an Israeli account based in Israel, right? Let me just check. This is an AI site. They removed the location. This was in written here, Tel Aviv. Anyways, this is an Israeli AI account, and he says, traitor Tucker Carlson leaves the Kremlin. No one should watch his interview with Putin. He should be banned from returning to the free world. So, guys, Tucker Carlson is a traitor, and he has to. They have to ban him from getting back to the United States. And what is the definition of a traitor? A traitor is someone who is collaborating with his enemy against the interests of his nation, right? This is the simple, let's say, definition. And is Tucker Carlson a traitor? This is the question, right? If Tucker Carlson is a traitor, first, the United States has to declare Russia as an enemy state. And they haven't done that. Is the United States in a state of war against Russia? No, not officially. They supply weapons to Ukraine, and at the same time, they say that they are not party of this war for supplying weapons to Ukraine, right? So they're sending contradictory messages here. So the United States says we are not at war against Russia, and then their mouthpieces in the press and among these politicians call Tucker Carlson a traitor. So it's either Russia an enemy or not. You have to decide. If it's an enemy, then you have to declare it as an enemy. And two, in regards to the weapons, they supply weapons to Ukraine, and then they say this doesn't mean that we're a party in this war, right? But at the same time, they accuse Iran of standing behind the attack, the drone attack against the American troops stationing on the borders between Jordan and Syria, because they say these weapons came from Iran to this Iraqi group. The contradiction and the double standards is too much for me even to swallow. And I've been following double standards and such hypocritical statements for quite a long time, guys. And this is not the first time that Tucker wanted to interview President Putin. He actually, I think this was in 2021, he tried to interview the first time President Putin, and he was questioned about that. He was questioned, and he revealed this on a podcast that he participated. This podcast is Full Send Podcast, and this is a 2-minute segment that I remembered because he spoke about this case, and I want to show you that this is not the first time that he tried to interview Putin, and he was spied. His device was spied by the NSA, and they asked him if he's going to interview Vladimir Putin in 2021.
But I'm not hiding anything. But I was definitely hiding my plan to go interview Putin just because it's an interview.
So how did that happen?
Business.
How do you know the NSA broke into your signal?
Because they admitted it.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Like, can you tell us about that? Like, how did you find out?
I got a call from somebody in Washington who would know. Just trust me. So I went up there for another reason, but this person said, you know, you're going to come to Washington anytime soon. This was a year and a half ago. And I was like, yeah, actually, I'm going to be up in a week. Meet me Sunday morning. so weird. Like, who does that? Just text me. You know what I mean? Just text me. No. So I go, and this person's like, and this is someone who would know. Are you planning a trip to go see Putin? This was the summer before the war started. And I was like, how would you know that? I haven't told anybody. I mean, anybody, not my brother, not my wife, nobody. And just because, you know, it's one of a million things you're working on. But that was one of them. I want to go interview. Why wouldn't I want to interview Putin?
Of course.
I want to interview Xi. I want to interview everybody, right? That's kind of my job.
We want to get Kim Jong-un on here one day.
Of course. We met him.
You did?
Yep.
Oh, we got to talk about that after. But
super interesting. But anyway.
Holy shit.
How would you know that? Because NSA pulled your text with this other person you were texting. How did you know that? And so I was intimidated. I'm embarrassed to admit, but I was completely freaked out by it. I called a U.S. senator who I know, not that well, but it seems like a trustworthy person. And I told him a story. I said, I just want to tell you this. And then I went on TV on Monday and I'm like, this happened. And so they had, you know, in Congress asked NSA, and NSA is like, yes, we did this, but for good reason. What would be a good reason to read my, what? But the head of NSA, it's fine. It gets, because everyone's in on it. Republicans and Democrats are all in on it. And by it, I mean the assumption there's no privacy whatsoever, that they have a right to know everything you're saying and thinking.
That shit's scary.
And that's just not a right as far as I'm concerned. By the way, if you have no privacy, you have no freedom. Freedom is predicated on privacy. It's like none of your business.
You don't even think about that. Like they can just go through your phone and find everything.
Well, they did it to me, so I know that for a fact. But again, if you have no privacy, you have no freedom.
Yeah.
I totally agree with Tucker Carlson here. If you don't have a privacy, you don't have a freedom. And we're heading toward more dystopian surveillance times. And increasingly, we are being integrated into the technologies. Like sometimes you feel like the devices are reading your minds. Like seriously, like you think about something and then you open social media and then you see that a product about something that you just thought about is just popping up on the device. I'm not saying that they read your mind, but it feels like we are becoming more integrated into the devices and they hear us. And these devices and these technologies, they all hear us. The applications, they hear us. The moment you speak about something and you're in a conversation and you're mentioning something, you see advertisements popping up. Yes, they listen to us. They otherwise, how would they know? They read our texts, everything. I mean, Snowden was notorious and very famous of revealing these facts, right? How the NSA spies on its own people in the United States, and not only in the United States, here in Germany, in Japan. They read every text, they read every message, they analyze them, they have their all AI systems to filter them and analyze them, and then humans they come to conclusions, just like the Israelis did in the Gaza Strip. And accordingly, for example, here in Germany, if I know that the NSA is reading the text just exclusively to abort, let's say, terrorist attacks or any attack that can disturb the public security here, I would probably accept that. But I know, and you know, that it's not going to end there. I mean, here in Germany, sometimes we read in the media that the German police has aborted a potential terrorist attack or terrorist trying to do something, or an attack was going to happen. And there was a telegram or a message from a friendly agency or a friendly country, and that is the NSA. I mean, the NSA admitted that they were spying on the former chancellor here in Germany, Angela Merkel, right? So they read everything and they analyze it. And when they see there is a danger, they tell the police. But this is not the only thing they do. They could also spy on people like myself. I'm just an independent journalist. I'm being critical to the policy of the United States. They could read my texts and they could publish it later to embarrass you, right? I mean, who among us hasn't sent some let's say, embarrassing thing in the past or did something on social media platforms? Everybody has some secrets, right? So they know everything about us. They check everything, they read everything, and that's scary, to be honest. And we're not free anymore. And this is going more and more into more dystopian surveillance. Guys, we are 400 people watching this live streaming. Thank you very much for tuning in. Really, I appreciate you all. And I would really appreciate if you just hit the like button while you're watching this video. It really helps me with the algorithm of YouTube, also to increase the reach of this channel and the subscription as well. I would really appreciate that. So, how did the Russian media receive Tucker Carlson, or what do the Russians think of Tucker Carlson? Tucker Carlson has reportedly left the presidential executive office of Russia, according to Sputnik. The news outlet took to the streets and asked the Russians what their opinion of Tucker was. So the Russian media, Sputnik, they went to the street and they just asked ordinary Russians, what do they think of Tucker Carlson? Let's take a look what they have to say. I cannot, unfortunately, show you this video as, in a full screen, because the logo here is Sputnik. If the YouTube now detects that there is a logo of a Sputnik somewhere because they look on the corners of the screen, then this video will go demonetized.
На сегодняшний день, на мой взгляд, это самый смелый, самый отважный американский журналист, который смело высказывает свое видение, свою позицию.
Такер Карлсон, он не часто вникает в новостях, но он правду говорит. Поэтому у него, кстати, проблемы в США из-за этого. Он сейчас, насколько я понимаю, сюда приехал. Вот. И не знаю, пустят ли его обратно.
Я очень уважаю за его смелость, я очень уважаю за его нормальное человеческое мнение о том, что происходит на самом деле, за его разумность, за его логику, за его понимание, где добро, где зло. Вот, и что он не боится это все высказывать, несмотря на то, что он живет в стране, которая заварила всю эту, как это сказать, фашистскую кашу.
Меня поразила, скажем так, откровенность, которой он рассказывает о реальных проблемах, которые есть, в данном случае в Соединенных Штатах. Вот. Очень хорошая подача информации, с хорошим чувством юмора. Я слышал о том, что он вроде бы приехал в Россию. Ну что ж, добро пожаловать.
Я считаю, что держит марку порядочного журналиста. Честного, открытого.
Цепляет тем, что он идет против общей антироссийской пропаганды, которая в США проводится. И он высказывает свое мнение. Вот этим он цепляет.
Ну и надо сказать, что очень положительно отношусь, потому что это объективный журналист, который реально показывает то, что происходит в мире, несмотря на то, что его позиции не воспринимаются особенно демократами в США, особенно сторонниками Байдена. Я очень рад, что он прибыл в Россию, он мне также рассказали, что он уже посетил Большой театр, и я думаю, что он здесь много чего увидит и узнает, что в России многие к нему относятся с очень большим уважением, и желаем ему здоровья, благополучия, пусть он продолжает эту работу. И я также буду рад, если вдруг у него состоится встреча с нашим президентом Владимиром Владимировичем Путиным. Это было вообще великолепно.
I just want to say something here. And look, those are just normal people in the street, and you see that they know who Tucker Carlson is. And they follow American media. And if you go to Syria and you ask people about Tucker Carlson, they will know who is Tucker Carlson. And they know CNN, they know Fox News, they know MSNBC. And some people follow these channels on YouTube or on other social media platforms. And people this is just my opinion, people in Syria are more knowledgeable about the American politics than the Americans, or most of the Americans, about the politics in Russia or the politics in Syria, right? I mean, the Russians know more about the Americans than the Americans know about the Russians. So this misconception about the Russians that, it's from the Soviet era, they portray them as what to say in Germany, they say zurückgeblieben. It's like they're backward, this is how they portray the Russians, that they are behind the time and everything. And but the Russians, they know the American politics. They follow what's happening there. They watch Hollywood. They listen to American music, etc., etc. But the other side, the Americans, they don't know much about Russia. And this is also some of which is the fault of Russia, because they don't put much effort to communicate in art and music, probably, with the American people. But one of the agencies that was presenting the Russian point of view and showing how the Russian people are is Russia Today, for example, and Sputnik and other channels. And those channels are all banned now, right? So I think this is only going to get worse for the Americans by not knowing much about their adversary, because they consider Russia their adversary. And if you really want to defeat your adversary, if you consider it an adversary, then you have to know more about them and not less. But in the United States, there is a state policy of keeping the people in the black, in dark, and not to inform them about the other countries, so that when they turn on their TVs, then some journalist on CNN or a senior commentator with former Marine is giving them 30 seconds of analysis, and then they just make up their minds, right? This is how they want things to happen. Not longer formats, not analysis, not intellectual talk, not debate, not discussion. They want to tell you what to think. They're not informing you the news, but they're informing you how to think. And I wonder, when other American journalists interviewed Vladimir Putin, were they also calling them a traitor? For example, here they praised Barbara Walters when she met with Vladimir Putin, and now they're calling Tucker Carlson a traitor for doing the same thing. I mean, it's there's so many examples of American journalists who met with Putin, even recently, right? And there are even like a series of videos and interviews with Vladimir Putin by Oliver Stone, for example, a few years ago. American presidents are meeting with Putin, except for Biden. Everybody met with Putin recently, right? And I think they met, right? Even Biden met, right? Can you please let me know in the comments, guys? They met, right? At the beginning when Biden was elected recently. I think they also met. So, and also there are journalists who have met with terrorists, right? Like Osama bin Laden. And Sean Penn, CNN interviewed Osama bin Laden here. You can see. And this is now Tucker Carlson is called traitor. And Sean Penn, he interviewed El Chapo, for example, right? And now we have even more recent example, guys, of an American journalist meeting with the head of Al-Qaeda in Syria. They call it former Al-Qaeda, of course, because they wanted to rebrand Al-Qaeda in Syria into some new cute organization. And then the leader of Al-Qaeda, even here, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, wearing a Western suit, like he's no more a terrorist, right? And this is the front line in 2021. And the American journalist met him. Over most of the 2 decades, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani's life has been a roadmap of Islamist militancy in Iraq and Syria. He joined the fight against US forces in Iraq and was jailed by the Americans. So they don't say what happened after he was jailed by the Americans, how he got free and how did he arrive back to Syria, and he became the commander of the Al-Qaeda in Syria, right? And then he started fighting against Bashar al-Assad. They don't tell you these stories. Today, Jolani is the leader of the most dominant force in opposition-held Syrian territory, not Al-Qaeda, opposition-held Syrian territory. From his base in the northwestern corner of the country, he and his organization have fought against Assad's forces, Assad's Russian and Iranian allies, and Jolani's own former allies in ISIS and Al-Qaeda. In his first interview with an American journalist, Jolani told Frontline correspondent Martin Smith that his role is in fighting Assad and ISIS and in controlling an area with millions of displaced Syrians who could potentially become refugees, reflected common interests with the United States and the West. He wants to be an ally of the West. I mean,
you're recognized, you're designated as a terrorist by the United States, by the United Nations, by many governments. There's a lot of Americans who would say you have no business being a leader as a terrorist.
I mean, how do you think this journalist went to Idlib? Al-Qaeda held Idlib in Syria. He went to Turkey, and from Turkey, somebody sneaked him to Idlib, right? And who controls the borders of Idlib? It's Al-Qaeda. So somebody had contact with Al-Qaeda there, and he met with the leader of Al-Qaeda in Syria, calling him the former, of course, Al-Qaeda. because they wanted to rebrand Al-Qaeda. And I forgot to show you in this article, there is a segment where the former ambassador to Syria, or the special envoy to Syria, he even called Al-Qaeda leader as an asset for the American strategy in Syria. And here it is. I just wanted to show you this too. James Jeffrey, who served as a U.S. ambassador under both Republican and Democrat administrations, and most recently a special representative for Syria engagement and special envoy to the global coalition to defeat ISIS during the Trump administration, told the Smiths that Giuliani's organization was an asset to America's strategy in Idlib. I mean, just for you to know, guys, Al-Qaeda, when they attacked Idlib from the Turkish border, they were directed by the CIA, by the Turkish intelligence, by the Qatari intelligence, armed to the tune of billions of dollars worth of weapons and training from a joint military operations room in Turkey. And they guided them, the CIA, the Turkish intelligence, and the Qatari intelligence, to occupy Idlib. And now they're trying to rebrand Al-Qaeda and call it, oh, this is no more Jabhat al-Nusra or Al-Qaeda, it's Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, you know, and they bring some suits to the leader of Al-Qaeda, and khalas, he is no more a terrorist. That's like nothing is happening there anymore, you know. Now, this hysteria about Tucker Carlson, if we want to speak about it from a different angle, it's because, guys, now Biden administration and the Senate is going to request $60 billion for aid to Ukraine. And the United States already has $34 trillion of debt. Poland is preparing for war with Russia. Germany is preparing for war with Russia. Finland is preparing for war with Russia. And so many European countries. The UK says we have to prepare for war with Russia. So I truly think that they haven't had enough yet with Ukraine. And they think that they can revive this fight against Russia. And they still think that they can harm Russia through the gate of Ukraine, completely disregard with what's happening to Ukraine, to the Ukrainians. The other day I was reading a report from Ukraine that there is no more young men left in the country for to give birth, like to marry with women, and then how do you think women will get birth, you know, and give birth? It's a big tragedy what happened in Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands of young men died in this war, and many of them also became refugees. So there is going to be a generation where there is no marriage, there is no birth rate will decrease in Ukraine, right? And this is tragic for the Ukrainians, but they don't care. And they don't care. And they don't tell their people all the story and how they themselves are in trouble. For example, in a rare interview on Bloomberg, Olaf Scholz finally admitted that Germany's government is in trouble. They were not, in the past days, they were saying that there is no such thing, that the Russian economy is crumbling, right? And now we can see that the economy in Germany is harmed. And again, we are going to send here from Germany to Ukraine so much more money, so much more billions to continue financing this war. And this is not this one. And this is also another article, and this time in the Financial Times. It says Olaf Scholz's energy policy is branded toxic by a German business chief. Like the people, the people who work in the industry and businesses are very, very, very upset with the economic policies of Germany and financing the Ukraine war. And this is giving the upper hand to what they call the far right here, right? AfD, they call it the far right in the mainstream media, and they're scoring more points every day because of these failed policies. And unfortunately speaking, guys, the West is, the collective West is such a beautiful place, and it deserves so much better than the politicians that they have. This is just my humble opinion. And one of which is, for example, the United States. You have a president who really is finished, you know? And how can a person like Joe Biden, seriously, man, how can a person like Joe Biden, how can anyone believe that Joe Biden is in charge? Like, this is a new video. He says, Joe Biden says that he recently met with Mitterrand from Germany. Mitterrand was the French president between 1981 and 1995. He also died in 1996. Take a look.
People have pled guilty. You know, right after I was elected, I went to what they call a G7 meeting, all the NATO leaders. And it was in the south of England. And I sat down and I said, America's back. Mitterrand from Germany, from France, looked at me and said, you know, why, how long are you back for? And I looked at him, and the Chancellor of Germany said, what would you say, Mr. President? He picked up the paper tomorrow in the London Times. And the London Times said, 1,000 people break through the House of Commons, break down the doors. 2 bobbies are killed in order to stop the election of the Prime Minister. What would you say? I never thought about it from that perspective. What would we say if that happened in another democracy around the world?
Man, this guy is finished, you know, and it became like a clown show nowadays. And this is Zelenskyy posting a video, and he says that today I visited frontline positions at one of the most difficult areas of the frontline in Robotin to speak with warriors in person and award those who have shown remarkable results in combat in recent years. The only problem with this video is I will play like, let's say 30 seconds of this video, and let's see if you guess. Check it right, and let me know if you guess where's the problem in this video.
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці, українки. Дуже активна неділя сьогодні. Вранці Роботине, одна з найбільш жорстких частин фронту, Запорізький напрямок. Особисто подякував воїнам, нагородив безпосередньо на передовій 5 з кращих, тих, хто відзначився в боях цими тижнями. Старших солдатів Ігоря Гончарука, Івана Тарана, Ярослава Поліщука, сержанта Михайла Блашківа, старшого лейтенанта Андрія Ольшанського. Андрія відзначено Хрестом бойових заслуг. Усі саме такі хлопці, чия хоробрість, витривалість зберігає наші позиції і нашу державу. Я дякую вам, воїни. Дуже дякую та усім вашим побратимам.
Do you guys see that this is it's like the green screen. It's a green screen, guys. 100%. It's a green screen. 100%. How is this guy even like, why do they post such videos, right? Why do they post such videos? And I'm truly baffled by like they publish photos like this, for example. I will just show you. They post videos like this. For example, this video. Another one, guys. Look. He's again in front of a green screen. I will just turn off the... Like, seriously, look. Look at his hair is not even moving. When the background is moving, his hair is not moving, guys. Why do they do such things? I don't really understand. Seriously. I'm trying to find this comment. Yeah. It's a really clown show, man, nowadays. And it's becoming more ridiculous that such politicians are supposedly in charge, you know, and they are taking decisions of war and peace and asking for our taxpayer money to go to war zones, etc., etc. It's like it's becoming ridiculous because this is they themselves published a photo like this the other day, showing us the technology in Ukraine, and then they post like, look at this. Like this, like, how can anybody think that this guy is in charge or he's leading or he's doing anything? He's just a middleman, you know? He's just an actor. He has a role playing. Like, seriously, what is this? So shameful, man. So shameful. Final news, guys, from Nicaragua. Nicaragua taking Germany, Canada, UK, Netherlands to the ICJ for genocide. The Nicaraguan government started Monday proceedings to take Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Canada to the International Court of Justice, ICJ, for their complicity in the genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza by providing the Israeli occupation with the weapons and means to carry out the horrendous act. The executive authority in Nicaragua published an official statement in which it revealed that it warned the governments of said Western powers that they might be jointly complicit in the flagrant and systematic violations of the Convention on Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide and international humanitarian law in the Gaza Strip. In its note verbal, Nicaragua urged the four states to immediately cease the provision of arms, munitions, and technologies to Israel because it might use them to facilitate or commit violations of the Genocide Convention in Gaza. The memorandum underlined that the countries supporting Israel are obliged to cut off supplies to it from the moment the state becomes aware of the existence of a serious risk of committing genocide. They are in deep trouble, guys. They are in deep trouble, and unfortunately, this is heading toward more escalation in the region. Let's hope sane people would bring some solutions and diplomacy prevails in Ukraine and in the Middle East, and this onslaught against the Gaza Strip, it comes to an end. Guys, thank you so much. Really, I appreciate you all for tuning into today's live streaming. 400 people is watching right now. I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button before leaving this live streaming to help me grow on YouTube. And if you want to support my independent work like this one I'm doing at the moment, you can become a patron. You can see the link is scrolling now on the screen. Patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. And I will see you hopefully tomorrow at 5 p.m. Central European times. Peace be upon you. Salam.